Hello, and welcome to the rest of the Broadway story. I'm your host Elijah, and today we're talking about Broadway history.
And I'm Clark, and if you can guess what show we're talking about before the end of our episode, you win.
Today's episode is about history, ancient history.
Ancient history is right. Imagine, if you will, a Broadway musical based on an ancient Roman story.
Or a Broadway musical based on Romulus himself, the founder of Rome. Romulus may or may not have been real, but we know that he did lots of things for the growth of his city.
Exactly. And that's including he wanted to throw a huge festival, so he invited all the people from neighboring cities to come.
There were tons of things to do, like chariot races, sporting events of all kinds.
Food trucks as well.
While in the midst of the festivities, he immediately ordered all of the soldiers to grab one woman from the neighboring cities and run off with them, like King Kong.
In one moment, hundreds of soldiers were rushing out with a woman in their arms.
Romulus knew what he needed to do to make the city grow. Soldiers he had, families he didn't.
Sounds pretty nuts, right? I mean, a Broadway musical centered around a party, people wearing crazy outfits and running around and screaming like they're all insane.
We know what musical you think we're talking about.
Cats. But luckily, we are not talking about Cats. Or Mary Poppins, if that was your second guess.
So, after what could be considered the greatest party fail in the history of time, you're probably wondering what happens next in the story.
Like maybe there was a whole series of wars that happened to reclaim the women?
Or the soldiers all hid in a giant wooden horse and waited until nightfall to attack.
But you would be wrong. According to ancient legend, Romulus gave the women civic and property rights in exchange for marrying his soldiers.
He even declared that their own children would be free.
But since the women were stolen, the threat of war was still on the table.
On the table until Hersilia, wife of Romulus, intervened and stopped the war.
So do you think you know what musical we're talking about?
If not, we can tell you it was based on a poem by famous poet Stephen Vincent Benet.
And that poem was called Sobbin' Women. But there weren't soldiers in the story. Instead, they were brothers. And there weren't like hundreds, but think more of like less than 8, but more than 6.
Clark, don't be so vague. It's 7.
Seven brides for 7 brothers. 7 Brides for 7 Brothers is known as one of the best American musicals ever made.
And a person connected to Strauss was also connected to the 1960s production of the show.
Strauss's very own Scott Baronet, and he was only 14 years old when he starred as Gideon, the youngest brother.
Which is a bit weird, because Gideon gets married.
I mean, it was the 60s. So join us next time for an extraordinary episode of The Rest of the Broadway Story.